scientists, it's Jessica Power, Science Curriculum Coordinator at Kansas Public Schools. We are back for another session of science. Last week we talked about energy. We talked about energy transfer, we talked about how to make a solar oven, we talked about heat and the effects of heat from the sun. This week we're gonna switch gears and talk about life science, which means it's a really good time to introduce you to my assistant. You probably noticed him last week just kind of sitting in the corner, not doing anything, but now's a good time to introduce you to Fred. Everyone, this is Fred. Fred, this is everyone. You're supposed to wave. He waves. Fred is a model of a human skeleton. That means all of the bones that you see on Fred are bones that you have in your body and I have in my body. So for example, this bone right here is called his humerus. I know it's kind of humorous that it's called the humerus, but this isn't a joke. His humerus connects his shoulder so he can move it back and forth to his elbow, just like you. You have your humerus that goes from your shoulder to your elbow that allows you to move your arm around. Now Fred's not gonna do much. You may notice from time to time that he just holds my lab coat. That's really his only job, since that's really all he can do because he's not alive. Okay, Fred, we'll see you later. Hang out, because he's hanging. All right, scientists, we are gonna spend today talking about life science. Specifically, we're gonna talk about animal adaptations, or different features or structures that animals have that are unique to them. Like us, we have thumbs. Those thumbs move around. There's actually not very many animals on the planet that have a thumb like we do. Most animals don't have to grab things and use their hands like we do. So that's kind of special. Other primates have opposable thumbs as well. We're also going to talk about today ecosystems, and we're specifically going to focus on food webs and food chains in ecosystems. We're going to talk about producers or plants. We're going to talk about consumers, animals that eat other things, plants, animals, or plants and animals. And then we're going to see how all of that is connected into what we call a food web. Now we're going to carry over a piece of information last week about energy transfer. Anytime an animal eats something, they're getting energy from their food. So for example, a rabbit that eats grass is getting energy from that grass. Now that grass got energy from the sun, which we talked about last week. It's all connected. So we're gonna have some friends from the Kansas City Zoo help us out. Unfortunately, they're not gonna be here live, but you can access these friends just like I'm going to access them. So we're actually gonna be talking a lot about penguins today. We're gonna talk about adaptations of penguins. We're gonna be talking about the environment that penguins live in, because they don't just live where it's cold. And we're gonna talk about how penguins fit into an ecosystem. Sound good? Let's get started. So the first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna make some observations about our penguin friends at the zoo. Now, if you wanna do this at home, you can go to the Kansas City Zoo website. There's a section for animals, and you can hover over that section and you'll see where it says orangutan cam or penguin cam. Click on penguin cam and it will give you a live feed of the penguin habitat or enclosure at the Kansas City Zoo. You'll be able to see the water area, you'll be able to see the land parts that the penguins have, and you'll be able to see the penguins waddling around. Let's take a look, shall we? All right, we have a view of the penguins at the Kansas City Zoo. Can you see them? We got some that are just waddling about with their wings out. Ooh, this one's flapping. This one, just chilling. Just hanging out, taking a nap. Ooh, we've got a couple in the water. Do you see them swimming? Look at that. If you can look carefully, ooh, it dove down. But you'll notice that penguins use their wings as swimmers, or as little fins in the ocean to help them move. Oh, there you go, you can see it fluttering. So even though penguins don't really fly, they use their wings to help them swim. Let's take a look. What do you notice about the color of the penguins? Make an observation. What do you notice about their color? Yeah, the penguin's body on the bottom is white, but the back of the penguin is black. Do you know why that is? Any guesses? Anyone? Let me give you a clue. There's a penguin swimming here and there. And oh, there is one swimming back here and back here. Can you see him very well? Why might the bottoms be white and the top be black? Yeah, that's camouflage. So the back of the penguins is a black color. And that's so that different organisms that may eat a penguin, like a large bird, can't see the penguin very well from the distance because it blends in with the dark color of the ocean. Now the bellies of the penguins have a white color to them, and that white color is so that when an ocean creature that maybe is looking up doesn't see the penguin at the surface of the water, because the white belly blends in with the light from the sky. So it's just one way that penguins are camouflaged. Now it's not feeding time, unfortunately, so we don't have any penguins that are hungry or eating. Well, they might be hungry. But fun fact about penguins, an adaptation or a structure, a special structure they have for survival is on their tongue, believe it or not. Penguins have little spikes on their tongue that help them to hold prey or food in their mouth. Now, most of the time when penguins are eating, they're getting their food from the ocean because they're eating krill. That krill can be really slippery and difficult to hold in their beak and hold in their mouth as they're swimming through the ocean. So they have those spikes to give some texture and to grip the krill so they don't fall out. Who knew that, right? Penguins have spikes in their mouths, on their tongues. Oof, can you imagine if we had that? I wonder what that would feel like. Probably not. Now, penguins also have a layer of fat in their body. Now, while as humans, we also have a layer of fat in our body, and that fat does the same job as the penguins. However, the fat in the penguins is a little bit different. The fat in the penguin is to help insulate or keep the penguin warm. A penguin that lives in the Antarctica is always around extremely cold temperatures, and so it needs a way to help stay warm. So that fat layer, plus their feathers, allow them to keep insulated or warm. Now their feathers are super short and really dense. That means there's a lot of feathers in a really small area. Think of it as layers. They have lots and lots of layers of feathers. So those feathers, along with that fat layer, help to keep the penguin warm. So those are just some adaptations or structures that penguins have to help them stay alive and be able to survive in their ecosystem in Antarctica. Now, Galapagos penguins that live on the island outside of Ecuador, they have a few different features or adaptations that allow them to live in a more tropical or warmer environment. But for today, we are just sticking to the Antarctica penguins. Okay, let's keep moving. Let's talk about how these penguins are in their ecosystems. What do these penguins eat? What eats these penguins? Let's find out.
Don't you just love penguins? They're so interesting. I think part of the reason is because we don't have penguins here in Kansas City, so it's real fun to watch them waddle around and observe their behaviors in an enclosure that represents their habitat. Now, at the very beginning of our session, I mentioned that penguins live in many different places. We typically think of penguins living in cold areas, like Antarctica. But did you know there's also penguins that live in what's called the Galapagos Islands? The Galapagos Islands are an island area just off the coast of Ecuador in South America. Speaking of South America is in the southern hemisphere. Penguins live in every continent on the southern hemisphere. So that would include South America, Antarctica, Australia. That was really warm in there. And Africa. Yes, there are penguins that live in Africa. They live on the very, very southern tip down in South Africa. Anyways, we're gonna focus today on our Antarctic penguins. Those are the penguins that live in Antarctica. Now there's several different types of animals or species that live in Antarctica. It is one of the smaller ecosystems in the world, but it's still really interesting. Now, believe it or not, penguins eat shrimp or krill. They eat really, really tiny, small organisms because penguins really aren't that big either. Now, we talked about adaptations and how penguins have those spikes in their tongue to help hold in that prey because sometimes things are slippery when they're wet. Now, let's talk about what else eats food in Antarctica. Behind me, I have a model of a food chain and a food web. Both of those are models or representations of what eats what in an ecosystem. So let's start with the food chain. You've probably seen a food chain, a row of organisms, plants and animals, with some arrows in them. This is a single line of organisms or species in an ecosystem and how they eat. So for example, phytoplankton is a plant that lives in the ocean. Phytoplankton is eaten by krill. Krill are really small organisms that are similar to shrimp. Krill get eaten by seals. Now there's a lot of different kinds of seals, so I kind of just lumped them all together, but for now, seals eat krill. Now seals, they're not at the top of the food chain. Seals are eaten by whales, specifically smaller toothed whales. That means whales that just have smaller teeth compared to larger whales, okay? So again, let's go through this. A food chain shows a single line of species or organisms that live in an ecosystem that follows a chain of food being eaten. So let's break this down in terms of energy. So phytoplankton, those are plants. Those plants get their energy from the sun. Yes, they still can get energy from the sun even though they're in the ocean and water. Now those phytoplankton take in that sun's energy. And then along comes some krill and they start eating the phytoplankton. Now the krill have just received or obtained, taken in that energy, once from the sun, that the phytoplankton had. Now, do you think the krill are getting greater than, less than, or equal to the amount of energy the phytoplankton took from the sun? Think about it. The krill, are they getting equal to, greater than, or less than the amount of energy the phytoplankton received from the sun? Think about it. Think about it. Got an answer? What do you got? If you said less than, you're right on target. You're right. Every animal in the food chain receives less and less energy from the sun compared to the phytoplankton. So the phytoplankton took the most energy from the sun. Then some of that energy the krill eats. Some of that energy again the seal eats. And then some of that energy the whale gets. You may notice that the farther up the food chain you get, sometimes have bigger diets or eat more things so that they can get more energy. Something else you notice as you go up a food chain is that your last animal, this last consumer, is a predator. And that predator is almost always a carnivore. Carnivores are animals that eat only meat. So humans, we're not carnivores because we eat more than just meat. Let's go back to the beginning. Phytoplankton, plants, they're producers because they produce their own energy they get from the sun. Then you have these consumers in the middle, and your consumers can eat only plants. So our krill only eat phytoplankton. That's all they eat is plants. They're considered herbivores. Other organisms like rabbits are also herbivores. They only eat plants. Moving up the food chain, you have some species that eat plants and animals. They're what we call omnivores. So they will eat phytoplankton, but they'll also eat krill. So we could draw another arrow to the seal from the phytoplankton, but that's not how food chains work. We'll get there. And finally, we have our whale. As I said, those are carnivores. So they eat only meat. So they're eating the seal, not the phytoplankton. Okay, now ecosystems are not this simple. Ecosystems aren't just a chain or a line of animals and plants. Ecosystems are more complex. And so a lot of times scientists use food webs to better understand the feeding patterns or feeding relationships in an ecosystem. Our definition of a food web is a model that shows all feeding relationships among living things in an ecosystem. All feeding patterns. So a food web takes all the living organisms in an ecosystem and shows you exactly what eats what and what's being eaten. Now I picked an Antarctic ecosystem because compared to other ecosystems, it's really small. If I was to put a food web of a rainforest in here, there'd be like 3 to 4 times as many animals. In fact, rainforests have thousands of species of plants. Thousands. I didn't have enough room for that. So let's take a look at the Antarctic food web and see where our penguins fit in. These poor little penguins. Let's take a look. So once again, we have phytoplankton and we have krill, and those pretty much sit at the bottom of our food web, excuse me. So we have our plants, lots of phytoplankton, because lots of animals are eating the phytoplankton. We have our krill. As you can imagine, there's a lot of krill in the ocean. There's a lot of things that eat krill. Then we move up to our next level. You'll see birds, seals, fish, penguins, and squid. Now you'll notice that there's arrows pointing at those animals. Those arrows represent what's eating. So that means birds are what's eating with this arrow. Birds are eating krill. Now unfortunately for the birds and this arrow, the seals are eating the birds. So you can follow the food web by where the arrows are going to determine what animal is eating. Now if we take a look, we have our plants, we have our herbivore. Now along here, you have some you have some carnivores and some omnivores. Typically, you're only gonna have a few carnivores in your ecosystem. A lot of herbivores, or only plant-eating animals, and some omnivores that eat both. So, keep moving. If we go up to our predators, or our carnivores, you will notice I have 2 animals at the top. The baleen whale, and then the smaller toothed whale. So there's a lot of different whales in that category. Now, only one of these animals eats, but is not eaten. Take a look. Only one of these animals eats, but is not eaten. You see which one it is? Yeah, it's the smaller toothed whales. You probably noticed because all of the arrows related to the smaller toothed whale are pointing at the whale. So our whale is our top of the food hierarchy or order of the Antarctic ecosystem. It's eating a lot of stuff, but nothing's eating it. So, adaptations are characteristics that different organisms have in order to survive in the areas they live in. Now, all of those areas they live in are very different. There's several different types of ecosystems. The Antarctic ecosystem is a type of tundra. Tundra just means that it's really dry, so there's not a lot of rain, and there typically isn't very many trees. We probably haven't been to Antarctica. I wish we could. That'd be really fun just to take a trip, all of us together, to go learn about the Antarctic ecosystem. But if you were to go to Antarctica, you're not gonna see any trees. You're not gonna see any rain. You're gonna see a bunch of ice and snow and some rock.
Another type of ecosystem, very different from the Antarctic ecosystem, is the tropical rainforest. The tropical rainforest, the biggest, is found in South America, and that's called the Amazon rainforest. You may have heard of the Amazon rainforest. In fact, the Amazon rainforest had a really, really big wildfire last year, and some parts of it are still burning. Every time a wildfire hits, that destroys part of an ecosystem. And when you destroy part of an ecosystem, well, you destroy the habitat and you even destroy the animals. We can talk about that in another episode. Let's just stick to the types of ecosystems right now. You also have desert ecosystems. You can think of like Southwest America, like Arizona, New Mexico. It's very dry, very hot, lots of cacti. It's plural for cactus. You have a lot of reptiles that like that heat. That's a desert ecosystem. You have other ecosystems too, like a forest, like we have here in Missouri, or the grasslands that's more flat with just lots and lots of tall grass. And then you also have down in like Africa, you have the savanna. Savanna is similar to a grassland, but the animals that you find here in the prairie grasslands in the Midwest are very different from the animals that you find in the savanna in Africa. So that's just an idea of some types of ecosystems. I encourage you to go do some investigating and check out the food webs for some different kinds of ecosystems. If this seems like an easy ecosystem to understand for a food web, go check out the tropical rainforest. Go check out the savanna. Find an area that interests you and learn more about it. Learn more about the ecosystem. What's the habitat like? What types of plants do you find there? What types of animals? And then, once you've done that and learned about the ecosystem, next learn about the feeding relationships. So learn about the food chains. And then you can identify a couple animals that you're most interested in those ecosystems, and you can learn about their adaptations, like a leopard, for example, in the savanna, going from really cold to really hot. Now, the leopard in the savanna, actually is able to climb and jump from tree to tree. It's camouflaged with all of its spots on its body, which helps it blend into its surroundings so its prey can't see it coming. Now zebras, as odd as zebras might be, black and white striped, they actually blend into their surroundings as well as prey. So zebras are also camouflaged so that predators can't locate them. So go take a look, go do some research, go learn about some ecosystems. They're fascinating. Thanks for tuning in and have a great day.